Shabbat Shalom. It is a pleasure to speak from this shulchan today, Birshut Harav, and we are all so happy to welcome back Rabbi Dahlin from Medinat Yisrael, mostly safe and sound, Baruch Hashem. I have been privileged to speak from this shulchan at key moments in my life. I presented my bar mitzvah speech right here. I stood under the chuppah with Jennifer right here. And I delivered a hesped, a eulogy from my beloved father, Cantor Rube, Zichrono Livracha, right here. So this is an opportunity that I appreciate. And appreciation is a key idea that is reinforced in this week's Parshat Korach. From an episode in which so much went so horribly wrong, we can learn and do so much that is right. In all fairness, though, the good that we learn is not from Korach. Korach is typically thought of as the personification of a dispute that is all about personal gain and not what might be better for the community. No, we learn the lesson of appreciation from the amazing Bnei Korach, the descendants of Korach. They survived the earthquake that swallowed their parents, and they might have gone on to nurse a grudge that could have defined their family forever. Rather, they took an ancestor's famous failure and they turned it around. Korach's job was to help transport on his shoulders the holy furnishings of the sanctuary, the Klei Kodesh, the Ark of the Covenant, the altar, the menorah, and so on. At some point, Korach decided that all this manual labor was really beneath him. Moses and Aaron, after all, were his cousins, but they were leading Israel while he was stuck on the wilderness moving crew. It wasn't right, it wasn't fair, he deserved better. He and a mob of similarly discontented Israelites confronted his cousins. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord? Long story short, God made it abundantly clear what God thought of Korach's attempted power grab. The story ends with Korach and his fellow rebels and all of their possessions completely annihilated, swallowed by the earth itself. The inheritance of the Bnei Korach was the legacy of a foolish man who brought ruin on himself and on all those who followed him. That was the shadow they lived in and the name that they could not escape. They would always be known as Bnei Korach. And yet, when the Tanakh introduces us to the Bnei Korach generations later, we don't see a clan holding on to bitterness and resentment. They're not nursing their centuries-old grudge. They are serving. In the time of the Beit HaMikdash, of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, the Tanakh explicitly records that the Bnei Korach, quote, were in charge of the work of the service, gatekeepers of the entrance to the camp of the Lord. They were appointed over the furnishings and over all the implements of the sanctuary. So hundreds of years after Korach's rebellion, his descendants were doing the very work at which Grandpa Korach had turned up his nose, transporting vessels, looking after furnishings and implements, guarding the gates of the sanctuary. The work didn't change. The attitude of those doing the work had changed. And it's an attitude that shows up elsewhere in the Tanakh. 11 of the 150 Tehillim in the amazing book of Psalms were composed by the Bnei Korach. These are profound and beautiful Tehillim. One was chosen as the psalm that we say together every Monday, and they are well worth more than a cursory glance. In these psalms, we catch a glimpse of what made these people different than their ancestor. For a day in your courts is better than 1,000. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tents of wickedness. Chapter 84 of Tehillim. And that's not a figure of speech. They literally were the doorkeepers in God's temple, and they deeply appreciated the opportunity to serve. They knew all too well the story of Korach's rebellion. They knew all too well that God had swallowed up their namesake and his tents and all his possessions in return for his defiance. They could have followed in Korach's footsteps. They could have made a scene and demanded more. Instead, they chose to be doorkeepers. They chose to fulfill the role that God had reserved for them, and they appreciated their ability to serve with honor and excitement. The Bnei Korach took a name and an identity, and they changed what that identity meant and stood for. Because of their dedication to God and the Jewish community, because of their refusal to follow in their forefathers' error, being a descendant of Korach was not a shameful thing. The Bnei Korach were there to do the job that God had set apart for them, and they did it. And they did it with passion, and they did it with appreciation. Today, we remember Bnei Korach for that passion, for their service, for their psalms of praise, for their zeal, for taking the chains that bound them to the failures of their past and shattering them. When we align ourselves with God and our community, we can prepare ourselves to make better choices than have been made in the past. Our challenges may not change, but we can change. We can change. Bnei Korach faced the same scenario as their ancestor, a position that lacked the pomp and the spotlight of the priesthood. But rather than reject it, they appreciated and embraced it as a gift from God. For the Bnei Korach, the opportunity to be near God, to serve God and the Jewish people was everything. What Korach took for granted, his descendants treasured. What about us? What do we treasure? What about us? In our lives, which one is it? Do we embrace and appreciate the opportunities to learn and grow and serve, even when they're not glamorous or enviable? Life is full of opportunities to complain and gripe about what we've been given, but it's full of just as many opportunities to appreciate and give thanks to God. Bnei Korach found the opportunities to give thanks, and they seized them. Let us do the same. Shabbat Shalom.